Hello and welcome back to another video on Horror O'Clock. Today we are going to be watching the official interviews from the Hodgson's family from the very famous Enfield hauntings. Now this video is after our little biography into what actually happened with the family, so make sure if you don't know the history that you go and watch that video. We explain all of the hauntings, all of the speculations, and just everything that happened in that family haunting. So we're going to watch two interviews today. So one of the interviews is with Morris from the physical research team, and then the other two are from the two daughters, Janet, the one who was affected the most in the paranormal, and the other daughter, Margaret. So let's watch those interviews. I have not seen them yet, so we're going to be watching them for the first time. Okay, so this is the first interview, the Enfield poltergeist, rare BBC footage.
I'm invisible.
I'm invisible.
You're invisible? Why are you invisible?
So much H-O-S-T.
So that's Morris there, and he's basically playing his audio recordings from the real investigation. We've shown a little preview of that in the last video.
Because I'm a G-H-O-S-T. Yes, he had quite a sense of humour. He also used to swear a lot as well.
Wow, so the ghost was a swearer. It's good to know.
I'm Maurice Gross, and I'm one of Britain's leading psychic investigators. I'm 76 now, and still on the trail of ghosts and poltergeists. In 1977, I led a team which investigated what is now regarded as the world's most famous poltergeist case, the Enfield poltergeist. It became world headlines at the time, mainly because of the strange, gruff voice that came from a girl called Janet.
Yeah, it's a very creepy, low voice, and I don't think any of us are ever going to forget how that voice sounded. When I heard it the first time the other day, it sent chills down my spine.
I still listen to the 180 hours of tapes I recorded during the investigation.
180 hours. That is insane.
Row, 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 the pub, check you down the street. Merrily, 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 lovely past the train. Now,
So that voice that we're hearing, that is the previous tenant that died, Bill Wilkins. You can hear like the Essex accent as well. It does sound like an old man. The fact it's singing nursery rhymes, it's taunting them, it's trying to scare them. It's obviously something of great intellect.
This voice is coming from an 11-year-old girl.
Well, perhaps, Guy, perhaps you've got something to say to them.
Yeah. I'd like to know how you make this noise without bashing Janet's vocal cords to pieces. If I do it for half a minute, I get a sore throat.
Goose chases here.
Okay, so the voice was actually coming out of her mouth. In the sources that I read, we were told that this voice would appear even when her mouth was taped or when she held water. So I'd like to see if they answer this in this video.
The voice was not made by the larynx, the voice box, but by the false vocal fold, which is above the larynx. And you only use that when you lose your voice and you talk like that. Well, if you talk like that for more than a couple of minutes, you start getting a sore throat. Talk like that for 5 minutes or so and you're going to start doing damage to your throat. And yet this voice used to speak up to 3 hours at a time. Not continuously, of course, but up to 3 hours at a time without the girl showing any distress at all. Absolutely remarkable.
That's a really great point as well, like that. He's just explained the science behind that voice. I don't really know how you could argue with that.
Voice was just part of it. The girl levitated, going from horizontal to vertical in a sixth of a second. Furniture was thrown around the rooms. The house was swarming with journalists. But after 4 days, they were baffled and frightened and called my team for help. A policewoman gave a sworn affidavit of the extraordinary activity she witnessed. Even the ghost chipped in. The death certificate confirmed the truth of what the ghost was saying. Many objects materialised out of thin air, spoons were bent, fires broke out spontaneously in the impoverished family's home. The family had to endure practically every known phenomena in a poltergeist case. They were traumatised. They didn't benefit financially and were ostracised by many of their local community. The Enfield poltergeist menaced that family for 18 months. It nearly destroyed their lives. I'm going back to see them for the first time in 20 years. Janet, the girl at the centre of it all, prefers to remain anonymous, but I spoke to her mother and sister.
And this just shows like how close Morris was after the investigation. They remained in contact even when the activity dialed down, and even now with the BBC, he's there doing an interview, obviously for footage, but he's still seeing the family, so that's quite notable throughout.
Here I am at this famous house in Enfield, and here you see Margaret and her mother, who were very, very involved in this case. You remember the day I first came?
Yes, I remember,
Yeah,
Mr. Gross. And
Mr.
you was on
Gross.
the case ever since then,
Yeah.
Yes.
onwards, and you saw everything and took note and explained to us.
You remember when the reporters and journalists were here? How did they carry on?
I could see the fear in some of their faces also, and they probably could sense that we was dead scared and wanted to run out any minute. I know I did. My sister did, I know that.
I remember one of them came in and he explained to me that I'd got a poltergeist in the house.
And
I said, what on earth's that? And I nearly fainted when he told me. I didn't even know what it was. In fact, I don't think any of us did.
And we couldn't even
Until
say the word
afterwards.
poltergeist until Mr. Groves from Psychical Research explained how to say poltergeist.
That's me.
And also what it actually meant in, was it German? Was it?
Yeah, poltergeist, noisy
Noisy
ghost.
spirit.
in the meaning
Noisy
of it.
ghost.
Also,
Yeah.
which he explained to us.
What do you say to people who say to you, with you children playing around, what do you say about that?
I say that's a matter of opinion. If you haven't experienced it, you're going to say that. But it did really happen.
It upsets me deep down to think that they can't give us an open mind, the ones that just put it down completely.
Yeah, and I get that as well. To people that have no experience in it, it's obvious they're gonna say it's not real. I personally have seen things fly around. I've seen things being thrown in other people's houses, so when you have stuff like that actually happening in front of you, it opens a new light for what you believe and what you choose not to believe. So if there's people watching this video that don't really believe it, that is okay, you know. Everybody has a different matter of opinion, but it's still really an interesting documentation in history.
But all I can say to them is I wish they could experience the same thing as what we went through. They certainly wouldn't say it was false or fake or it was child playing or...
But I don't agree with ever wishing somebody would experience the same things. The severity of how their family was treated and traumatized and attacked, I wouldn't want to wish that on anybody. But I definitely get her point, but I think that's a bit extreme to wish it on somebody.
The welfare of people at the centre of poltergeist activity is very important. I believe that most poltergeist activity is actually caused by very high levels of stress. Occasionally, you get paranormal entities interacting with this, and this is what I think happened at Enfield. I haven't spent all my years searching for the paranormal. Like everybody else, I had a normal life to lead. When I left school, I was a commercial artist. I did 2 years apprenticeship. You can see on the pictures on the wall, well, actually, they are my pictures that I have done. I turned into quite a good commercial artist, in fact.
So Morris was an artist before he joined the team for physical research. That is really interesting.
But then the war was looming, and I joined the Royal Artillery, super heavy guns. We had to make a hasty retreat back to Dunkirk, with, of course, thousands of other troops. And we were bombed and blitzed to hell there. It really was rough going. I suppose I was one of the reasonably lucky ones. I got off on a destroyer. I met Betty at a tea dance in Marble Arch. Always very taken with her, right from the word go. And it was on a Sunday, and I met her on the Sunday, proposed to her on the Thursday, and in 10 weeks we were married. Because everybody said at the time, oh, these war marriages, it would never last, it would never last. Well, I don't know, perhaps it won't. I mean, it's only 51 years now, so I suppose.
So Morris is showing a true Romeo and Juliet story there.
I think I can say it at last. We've had a good life. A good life, that is, until the death of our youngest daughter, Janet, in a road accident. Betty and I believe that Janet tried to contact us after her physical death. You might believe that was just our way of dealing with bereavement, but it was a turning point in my life. I decided to carry out serious research into the paranormal and join the Society for Psychical Research.
Yeah, so just to clear that up, Morris also had a daughter called Janet. So just to spare the confusion, that's two.
This is now my psychic HQ. The Society is the world's leading centre for the scientific study of the paranormal. I'm the chairman of the Spontaneous Phenomena Committee. People write to us from all around the country with their strange cases, which we investigate on a non-fee-paying basis. We had a letter from a woman in Watford. She claimed her clothes were being severely damaged and sometimes disappearing altogether. Shirley had submitted herself to psychiatric treatment, but there was no explanation. She now keeps her clothes in padlocked cupboards. Only her husband has the keys. In desperation, she contacted our society.
Hello, Shirley. Hello, nice to see you. Hi.
Hello, all right, thank you. Hello, Doggy. Oh, it's exciting, isn't it? Hello.
Go in.
Hello. They're wonderful dogs. They're very, very intelligent.
Right, upstairs, just let me show you.
You know I'm making a video diary, Phil. You've no objection to us using some of this. We won't use much of it, but some of it you have.
No objection at all, Morris.
Right, OK, thank you. And here the famous padlock wardrobe.
Padlocks on that one. This is mine with the stronger lock on the chain. Again, I don't even touch these.
Okay, this is crazy. I've never heard of anything like this. In order for this woman to claim some sort of sanity in her life, she's had to lock away all of her clothes because they keep moving. She's applied for psychiatric help because maybe something's not right with her, but she seems quite sane in the video. I know that can't describe anything off camera, but to see all those locks, it shows it's something really serious.
Can you unlock?
No, my husband's got the keys. There's only one set and he's got them with him.
Have any shoes or clothes or anything disappeared from that one?
Oh, yeah.
Whilst it's been padlocked up recently?
Yeah. Yes, oh, yeah. In the last few months I've had a shirt from there and a skirt. Sometimes I forget and then I suddenly think, oh, I haven't seen that skirt or whatever. And from the bottom, I mean, my brown boots were actually in that wardrobe when they the box. We actually found the carrier bag in the bottom of that wardrobe.
Now, when you want anything out of there, you have to ask your husband.
Yeah, if he isn't in, I leave him a note. I had to leave him a note actually last night to leave this skirt and sweater.
Well, that's dreadful.
Yeah,
really.
And sometimes he goes out and I have to say, no,
excuse me laughing, but it seems to be a ludicrous situation.
I don't tell people, I don't say anything to anybody.
Come on, dog, you're the one who's responsible, I'm sure. You are responsible for it. Oh, look at him wagging his tail.
I wish he knew. If that dog could talk, he'd be able to tell me a lot of things.
Yes, I'm sure he would. Yes. May I suggest to you that you stop all this padlocking business and get back to a normal life? And if things still disappear, you start to accept it and see then whether it starts to diminish. I think
that's good advice, to be honest. In recent day, we would obviously say, get a camera in that room, something along these lines, but remember, I'm not sure on the exact date of this video being recorded. It was 20 years later from the 70s. This will be 90s, early 2000 interviews going on right now. Obviously, the technology then, phones were only just starting to come about. So,
You see, I think what is happening is that let's assume that it is paranormal activity. I mean, I'll make the assumption it is paranormal activity. By having all these padlocks and bolts and sleeping in the spare room, you are continuing a high-stress situation. Now, if you're continuing this high-stress situation, and if it is paranormal activity, if it is teleportation, the movement of objects or whatever...
Oh, I didn't expect it to cut off so suddenly. I'm gonna assume Morris was gonna say something along the lines of, you're gonna keep feeding it energy. If you keep living in stress, you're feeding whatever is living in the house. So you need to subside it, get rid of that, get rid of the stress, acknowledge what is happening, but ignore it and see if that starts to diminish. Go away completely so that you can live a normal life. I feel like that was great advice personally, especially not having much technology to be able to like keep an eye on things. Perhaps the BBC could have offered to record the room for a few nights, but that might be a bit on the invasive lines. So in the first video, Janet wanted to remain anonymous. This interview is from 2012, so I assume she wanted to be on camera this time. This is supposed to be an interview with Janet. Okay, so this next interview seems to be from ITV, and presenters are Phil and Holly. They're very famous in the UK. They run Good Morning Britain, and they've done many other shows.
So Holly has decided to sit out this interview. She's in fact left the studio, so she can't hear or see anything of what we're about to discuss. So, nearly 35 years ago, a normal family was thrust into the limelight thanks to the weird and very strange goings-on of an alleged ghost or poltergeist causing havoc in their home. The story made news across the country, changing the Hodgsons' lives forever. So, was 284 Green Street in Enfield, North London, the most haunted house in Britain? On the 31st of August 1977, the ghostly goings-on at an ordinary semi-detached council house in Enfield in North London made national headlines. 284 Green Street was home to the Hodgson family, and it's claimed the Enfield poltergeist. For just over a year, a series of bizarre events took hold in the house, including flying furniture, levitation, and even family members dragged from their beds by some kind of force.
He lifted right over the double bed.
11-year-old Janet Hodgson seemed to be the centre of the activity, and eerie photographs appear to show her being flung across her bedroom. But many questioned whether it was all a hoax. Now, over 30 years later, the case continues to intrigue and baffle in equal measure. And Janet joins us now, along with poltergeist expert and investigator Guy Lyon Playfair, and sceptic and author Deborah Hyde, and welcome.
Oh, so they brought a skeptic in as well. That's interesting.
You don't do very many interviews on this subject. You've sort of put that behind you now. So thank you very much indeed for coming today to take part in this and reliving this extraordinary time of your life.
I'm sorry, but Phil really said extraordinary.
Your mum is Peggy, a single mum, and lived at 284 Green Street. This is the late 1970s, and you've got Margaret, who was 12 at the time, and then there was you, 11, and then there was Johnny, who was 10, and Billy, who was 7. So what was the first time something strange happened in this house?
Well, me and my brother, we were sitting down to bed one evening, and we could hear this shuffling noise. And Mum coming because she could hear us shouting and screaming, and we said that the chest of drawers was moving towards the bedroom door. So she said, oh, don't be silly, but she see it move for herself, and then at one point she couldn't push it back, and then she got quite upset and said, right, everyone downstairs.
Well, you went to get a neighbour, didn't you?
That's right. Yes.
Vic Nottingham was the neighbour who was a builder.
That's right.
And he came in, and it scared him so much that he scarpered.
Mm-hmm.
And then you called in the police, and we've got WPC Caroline Heaps saw a chair move. She said at the time a large armchair moved unassisted 4 feet across the floor. This is the police. Eventually the officers left, telling you that the incidents were not a police matter and you couldn't find anyone breaking the law. What they were doing, it was these events, whatever they were frightening you terribly
Well,
because
that's
they
right.
progressed and got worse and worse.
So I didn't actually know that Vic Nottingham actually just ran out of the house out of fear. I know he went back the next day, I think, to check up on them, but I didn't know that he actually got so scared that he ran away. So something's telling me I should watch these interviews while researching, but I think it's just nice to kind of get some more insight afterwards so we can kind of see where we didn't quite get some information.
So what else happened? What else do you remember of that time?
Furniture turning over, cups filled with water, fires igniting on oven gloves and matches where part of the box or the oven glove would burn but it would go out. Voices, levitation, and at one point the most frightening thing was when a curtain wrapped itself around my neck next to my bed.
So I did actually hear about this. A curtain had wrapped itself around a neck and a mum came to save her, and that's when they realised that this was indeed something that could kill them. I didn't include that in the video because it was a speculation, but it's actually been said by Janet herself. I'm just honestly mind blown. I really should have watched these earlier.
Felt for you, as an 11-year-old, this felt malevolent. It felt very unfriendly.
It did, yeah. I mean, there was times when it was fascinating to see, but when it was happening to you, like the levitation, the voices...
Well, we've got a picture of here of taken by a newspaper photographer, and this is of you sort of flying through the air. And at the time, people were saying, "Well, you've just jumped off the bed," but you say that's not the case. You didn't just jump off the bed.
No.
What happened? What were the circumstances surrounding that photo?
Well, I was in bed and it was like I felt cold hands, and there was like a force that sort of pulled me out of bed. And sometimes I'd be pulled to my bedroom door, sometimes I'd be pulled up into the air.
How come the newspaper journalist was taking a picture of you whilst you were in your bed? Did you just fly? He happened to be there at the time.
No, he didn't. He wasn't there at the time. No, it was the camera was on continuous drive.
I see. So it was recording all the time.
Yes.
And that was. I see.
Yeah.
Guy, you were brought in. You were an investigator and a writer, and initially you didn't really want to get involved with this.
No, I didn't at all.
Also, just one thing to note, like, none of them are smirking, so if this was fake, I think, like, some of the things that they were saying, a smirk would come out of one of them. I know with me, I'd be really nervous to go on an interview that's broadcasted in front of thousands of people and lie. I would just... I couldn't contain myself if I was lying. So that's one thing to note. Obviously, some people are good actors, aren't they? But that's something that's really selling it to me right now. Janet is serious, her voice is low. It's almost like she just doesn't want to talk about it, which is genuinely how she's feeling.
Well, hearing Maurice Gross on the lunchtime news on Sunday, he'd just been spending the night there with a BBC reporter, and I realised that it was a big story and it wouldn't hang around and wait for me, so I just went straight off.
Now, are you the sort of person who believes in the supernatural and poltergeists?
Well, hang on, I mean, it's not supernatural. If it takes place in nature, it's natural.
Yeah.
It's just not understood. It's what some people call paranormal, which I try to avoid. But, yes, I was a member of the Society for Psychic...
The way Janet is just staring at Playfair, I know she's being respectful, but she's like, excuse me, excuse you, I was thrown across a bed, mate, and you're saying that it's probably natural. Sorry, that's just what I feel like is going on in Janet's head. Anyway, personally, I think they should have said there's two skeptics in the room, because Playfair doesn't seem to be on that side, which is perfectly fine.
Research, this is what we do. And nobody else is prepared to do it. I mean, that's why after Janet's family had called everybody else, police and the local priest and so on, they ended up calling the SPR, and we were the only people who would be able to do anything useful for them.
What did you witness?
Oh dear, do I have all day? Well, I think the most clearest memory I have is exactly what you just described. The woman police constable saw this heavy chair sliding along the floor and then flipping over backwards just after Janice had got out of it. And that was right in front of my nose in a brightly daylight. And then she goes into the kitchen, and she goes through the door. There's a tremendous crash as the table goes over when she was nowhere near it. So that was two things at once, out of about 1,000, I should think, altogether.
That's really interesting to me, like, all of this stuff Playfair has seen with his own eyes, but he doesn't quite want to say it's paranormal, which is fine. I just feel like, usually if you see things, it's more evidence than not to believe in it. So it's really interesting to see that Playfair kind of has the opposite mindset to me. The second I started seeing things happening, I was like, okay, something is really going on here. So that's a really interesting take.
Well, let's talk about Bill Wilkins, the voice of Bill Wilkins. And this is, you say, this is a voice that came out of your mouth. It felt like it was coming from behind you.
Yeah.
A very gruff voice, and which you found out that it actually there was someone here. At one point, the voice said, "Just before I died, I went blind and then had a hemorrhage and fell asleep and died in the chair in the corner downstairs." And Bill Wilkins' son, Terry, confirmed that this is in fact how his father had died.
Yes.
Many people said, you know, that they couldn't understand how you could sustain this voice, which was very raspy, without it actually hurting your throat. Were you aware that when it happened that these words were coming out of your mouth uncontrolled or controlled by you?
Uncontrolled. It wasn't controlled by me, I wouldn't say so.
Could you hear them at the time, or were you
could hear
knew
them,
it was happening?
yes. I could hear them, but it just didn't feel like it. It felt like it was behind me, not within me. And at one point, Maurice Groves take my mouth up, and he filled my mouth with water, and it still spoke.
Oh my god, she finally answered, she answered my question about the tape and the water. I was getting really scared that that was just a speculation, but Janet herself literally just said it. The voices were still there, and it felt like it was behind her.
So it came out even though you got a mouthful of water. Yes. You heard these voices?
Yes, indeed.
Which sound terrifying.
Well, they terrified the speech therapist we brought in. She was totally freaked out and refused to be interviewed. She just ran out of the room. So, I mean...
That's just wild. This really makes me, like, want to know Playfair. Why don't you believe in it, man? I guess because he's a scientist, you know? But it's just crazy.
There's a professional opinion for you. And if she couldn't take it, then we did establish that it was produced by the false vocal folds, which you use for these sort of growly commercials. You can't keep that up for very long without getting a severely sore throat. And Janny could go on for hours and not get a sore throat, so how do you account for that?
So, Deborah, for reasons of balance, obviously you are a sceptic, and you don't believe any of this.
No, I'm afraid I don't really, on balance. I think historically there have been enough clear hoaxes, the Fox sisters in Hydesville in 1848 and the Amityville Horror. But even where you're not taking into account hoaxes...
See, I know I can't read Janet's thoughts, but she's like, Deborah, you don't know what I've been through, girl. No one asked you to be here. Sorry. Deborah, please continue.
Remarkably bad at remembering things accurately and seeing things accurately. We see things that aren't there, we don't see things that are there, and we misinterpret things that are there, especially if we're distressed or there's ambiguous information. It's very easy to impose what's called top-down processing. That's the image, the ideas you already have about the world get imposed onto the world.
I'm starting to feel like bringing a skeptic in the interview wasn't the best idea. I can see how uncomfortable Janet is about Deborah rambling on. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to her. I just feel like she don't get interviewed very often, and you brought a skeptic, somebody that is basically saying, I don't think that what happened to you is what you think happened, like contradicting. obviously it's very interesting though.
Things that you're seeing.
It's quite compelling though, isn't it? If you've got police officers or speech therapists, all professional people who seem to have been deeply involved.
It is, and
affected.
it's a fascinating story, and that's why people remember this side of it rather than all the people at the time who disagreed. The journalist at the time, Doug Benz, and the photographer, Graham Morris, had their issues with it. Mary Rose Barrington from the SPR had their issues with it. There was a subsequent study by the SPR that concluded that the girls were faking it. So
No,
I think that
that's wrong. That did not conclude that.
they saw the girls bending spoons, and they thought that some of the girls...
misinterpretation of Mary Rose Barrington did a very thorough
You tell him, Playfair. You tell Deborah.
and fair investigation. She concluded at the end that a great deal of the case was absolutely genuine.
I'm sure it's very difficult to tell from this. It's very difficult to get...
Yeah, so one thing that I didn't mention in the first part, they were caught bending spoons, and I think Janet even had snuck a camcorder into a room, which Deborah's just pointed out. So Deborah's kind of going off all of the things that people disagree with and the things that people were caught with, but how can you explain the voice, which is told it's being used in the lower vocal folds rather than the actual larynx? They've already explained, and a speech therapist couldn't even explain it. But Deborah only focuses on, oh, they bent spoons. That's something that's fake. Yeah, that's questionable. But think about the things that can't be explained, that professionals can't explain.
Anything under controlled conditions, as soon as you do, it all disappears. That definitely happens. But looking back on it in history now, it's very difficult to say this happened, that happened exactly. What we do know is this stuff isn't replicable under controlled conditions for the most part, that people in the SPR had issues, that other people had issues, but that we remember this story because it's the best one.
Well, hang on. I mean, my tape recorder was on practically all the time, and you can't accuse tape recorders of having a false memory, or are you suggesting all the tapes have been faked?
No, not at all. I do know, now, who was it that said that the girls were being caught tampering with the tape recorder and damaging it? Was it...
No, they
somebody came in later?
No, that's completely wrong. I mean, that was a separate incident where we were trying to record with a videotape to try and get some action in the bedroom.
I think the thing is, though, that I feel sorry for the girls, really, because I think they must have been under a tremendous amount of pressure after a while to come up with something, you know,
come up with something. I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think this was a good idea. I'm really cringing that you brought a skeptic onto the interview. I understand why, but the tension, it is suffocating me. Honestly, but let's keep watching.
Wasn't there, love? You don't know. You don't know what I went through or how I feel today.
No, I'm sure I don't know how you feel today.
It will always be with me in here.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. I just know that human beings do misinterpret things all the time.
Well, you have to see these things to believe them, you know, and we were there and you weren't. That's what it...
Oh my god, I'm so happy that Playfair came through. I know that Playfair has his own opinion, but he's still, obviously, I'm glad that he's defending them because he was there. Deborah wasn't. And this is why I feel like, okay, you can have your opinion, but you was not there.
Amounts to. I mean, if you think I could have been deceived by this clever little girl for 14 months...
Arthur Conan Doyle was deceived by the girls who brought up the Cottingley fairies.
Well,
yes, but there were so many witnesses to this case as well as...
And there were witnesses who didn't agree with this side of the story as well.
Well, we'll have to leave it there, and it is a fascinating discussion, and I thank you all very much indeed for taking part. After your mum died, Claire Bennett and her 4 sons moved into the house. She reportedly said, "I didn't see anything, but I felt uncomfortable. There was definitely some kind of presence in the house. I always felt like somebody was looking at me." She then found out about the house's history and said suddenly it all makes sense. They moved out after just 2 months. The house is currently occupied by another family who did not wish to be identified. Thank you very much indeed. It is a compelling story, whatever anyone believes, and thank you very much for coming in. Thank you. John Barrowman's here right after the break with Holly.
Okay, so that second interview, it was very painful to watch, a little bit distressing, I'm sure, for Janet. but I'm glad Playfair was there to sort of defend as well. As you can tell, I am a firm believer in the paranormal, so obviously I don't side with Deborah. I respect her opinion, but I don't understand why they thought it was necessary to bring a skeptic onto the interview when they weren't there. Maybe if it was somebody that actually was part of the scene who was a skeptic. Sorry. Maybe somebody who was there at the time who was a skeptic. I would gladly rather hear argue about it, you know? But I'm so glad that it was, so it cleared up so many things. And I'm just really glad that this evidence of interviews and pictures and audio, unlike a lot of paranormal cases, we don't get much backstory after the statements. So with this story, it's very, very interesting to say the least. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This was my personal reaction to the interviews. Like I said, I haven't watched them until now. So yeah, I will see you guys in the next video. Stay spooky.